I was sitting at my kitchen table on a Sunday morning when my phone started going off. Not one notification. Not two. Continuously. My sister first. Then an old friend from university I hadn't spoken to in almost 3 years. Then my cousin. Then my mother. All of them sending me the same link. All of them asking some version of the same question. Is this you? I clicked it, and there I was. Filmed without my knowledge of my own desk. Caught in a moment that looked ridiculous out of context. Posted publicly with a mocking caption designed to get laughs. And underneath it, 2 million views. 2 million people had seen my face. My workplace. A moment I had no idea was being recorded. I watched it once all the way through. Then I put my phone face down on the table. And I sat there for a long moment. Not shaking. Not reaching for the phone to call Brandon. Not drafting an angry message in my head. Just thinking. Because the first decision you make in a moment like that is the one that defines everything that comes after it. And I had absolutely no intention of making the wrong one. I didn't go to HR. I didn't ask him to take it down. I just picked up my phone, and I started thinking about what I was going to record. But to understand why I responded the way I did, you need to understand the place I was responding from. I have worked in mid-sized companies my entire career. Not startups. Not corporations with 40 floors and a separate department for everything. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone. Where you eat lunch near the same people most days. Where the culture of the office is shaped less by policy and more by whoever happens to be loudest in the room. I had been at this particular company for just over 4 years. Long enough to understand how it worked. Long enough to know which relationships mattered and which ones to navigate carefully. I was good at my job, not in a way that drew a lot of attention, in a way that produced consistent results and kept the right people satisfied. I wasn't the most visible person in the building. I wasn't the one who commanded a room or made sure everyone knew what I had contributed. I just worked, carefully, consistently, without needing it to be performed. Brandon had been at the company about 18 months when any of this happened. He came in confident, the kind of confident that announces itself immediately. You notice it in the first week. The way he moved through the office like he had already decided he belonged there. The way he spoke in meetings, not necessarily with more insight than anyone else, but more loudly, more assuredly, in a way that filled the space before anyone else could. He was funny. I'll give him that. Quick, good at reading a room and finding the thing that would land. In small doses, he was genuinely entertaining. The problem was that Brandon's humor had a particular structure. It always needed a target. It wasn't the kind of funny that comes from observation or absurdity or timing. It was the kind that works by elevating the person telling the joke at the expense of someone else in the room. And he was skilled enough at it that most people laughed anyway. Because that kind of humor creates a social pressure. You either laugh along and signal that you're in on it, or you don't laugh and suddenly you're the one who can't take a joke. Brandon understood that dynamic intuitively. He used it constantly. I had been on the receiving end of it a few times. Nothing extreme. A comment in a meeting that got a laugh at my expense. A joke about something I had said that reframed it just enough to sound foolish. Small things individually. But they added up, and I noticed something about the way he did it. He never chose people who would push back hard. He chose people who were unlikely to make a scene, who would absorb it quietly and move on. He had correctly identified me as one of those people. What he had not correctly identified was why. I didn't absorb things quietly because I was passive, or because I lacked confidence, or because I didn't notice what he was doing. I absorbed things quietly because I had learned a long time ago that reacting to that kind of person is exactly what they want. Brandon fed on reaction. Every laugh, every flinch, every visible discomfort was fuel. The best response to someone like that has always been to simply not give them what they need. Deny them the reaction. Stay level. Move on. So that's what I did. Every time. I wasn't building resentment toward him. I wasn't waiting for an opportunity. I was just navigating a difficult personality the way you learn to navigate difficult personalities in a workplace. You don't escalate. You don't reward. You simply continue doing your job well enough that the noise around you becomes irrelevant. Brandon had a following in the office, a small group of people who orbited him, laughed at his jokes, forwarded his messages, treated his approval as something worth having. I understood that group too. Every office has one. They form around whoever projects the most social confidence, regardless of whether that confidence is backed by anything real. They're not bad people necessarily. They just take their social cues from whoever seems most certain. And Brandon was always certain. I existed slightly outside that orbit, not antagonistically, just separately. I had my own colleagues I worked well with, my own small professional relationships built on actual work rather than social performance. I was content with that. My life outside the office was full enough that what happened inside it didn't define me. I had things I cared about, people who mattered to me, work that I found genuinely interesting even if nobody was watching me find it interesting. That context matters, because what Brandon did next was designed to humiliate someone whose entire sense of self was contained within those office walls. He didn't understand that mine wasn't, and that miscalculation was the beginning of the end of everything he thought he had built. It was a Tuesday afternoon, nothing remarkable about it. The kind of day that disappears into the week without leaving any particular trace. I was at my desk working through a report that needed to be finished before end of day. Focused, headphones in on one side the way I do when I need to concentrate, but still want to stay aware of the room. At some point during that afternoon, I did something. I don't even fully remember what it was now. Something minor. Something that in the ordinary flow of a normal work day would have meant absolutely nothing. I reached for something and knocked it. Or my chair rolled in an awkward way. Or I reacted to something on my screen with an expression that looked strange from the outside. Something small and human and entirely unremarkable. Except Brandon had his phone pointed at me when it happened. I didn't know that. I had no idea. I was just at my desk doing my job. He didn't say anything. Didn't laugh loudly. Didn't draw attention to it in the moment. He just filmed it quietly, pocketed his phone, and went back to whatever he was doing. I found out later from a colleague that he had shown it around to a few people in the office before posting it. Got some laughs. Decided it was worth a wider audience. He posted it that evening. A public account he used for that kind of content. Short videos, workplace observations he found amusing, commentary on everyday situations designed to get quick laughs. He had a modest following, a few thousand people, enough to feel like a platform, but not enough to expect anything significant. The caption he wrote was designed to land a certain way. It positioned me as someone oblivious, someone performing incompetence in a professional environment. The framing was mean in the specific way that tries to disguise itself as lighthearted. The kind of thing that if you object to it, you're told you can't take a joke. He tagged the location, not the company name directly, but enough that anyone who looked would know where it was filmed. I don't know exactly when it started moving. These things have their own momentum. The right account shares it, or it lands in a feed at the right moment, or the algorithm decides it fits a pattern that gets pushed further. Whatever the mechanism, it moved. By the time I woke up Saturday morning, it had a few 100,000 views. By Sunday morning, it had crossed 2 million. My phone started going off before I had even made coffee. My sister first, then the university friend I hadn't spoken to in nearly 3 years, then my cousin, then my mother, each of them sending me the same link, each of them with their own version of the same question. I watched it the way you watch something that features you, but that you have no memory of creating. With a strange detachment at first, almost clinical. I noted the angle he had filmed from. I noted the caption. I noted the comments underneath. Most of them were laughing. Some of them were the particular kind of cruel that anonymity makes people comfortable with. A small number were questioning why it had been posted without consent, but they were buried under everything else. I watched it once all the way through. Then I put the phone down, and I sat with it for a while, because the first thing I needed to do was separate the emotional reality from the practical one. The emotional reality was significant. I won't pretend otherwise. 2 million people had seen my face connected to a narrative I had not chosen and had not consented to. People from my actual life were sending me the link. My mother had seen it. Old friends had seen it. People who knew me in context entirely removed from that office had now been handed a version of me that Brandon had framed for maximum comedy at my expense. That lands, even when you're not someone who ties their identity to their workplace. Even when your sense of self is reasonably stable, being seen that way, publicly, virally, without your knowledge, carries a particular weight. I let myself feel that weight. I didn't push it away or tell myself it didn't matter. It did matter, and pretending it didn't would have been dishonest. But I also knew something important. The emotional reality and the correct response to it were two separate things. I could feel humiliated and still choose how to act with complete clarity. Those two things did not have to interfere with each other. I thought about going to HR immediately. I thought about calling Brandon directly. I thought about posting an angry response. I considered each option fully, and I dismissed each one for the same reason. All of them were reactive. All of them would position me as someone responding to Brandon's framing, fighting within the story he had created, trying to correct his narrative from inside his narrative. That was the wrong move. The only move that made sense was to step completely outside his frame, to create something that stood entirely on its own, something that didn't reference him, didn't attack him, didn't ask for sympathy, just introduced me, the actual me, the one he had reduced to a 2-second clip and a mocking caption. I picked up my phone, not to call anyone, not to draft a complaint, just to think about what I was going to say and how I was going to say it, because the response I was building in my head had exactly one chance to land correctly, and I was not going to waste it. I spent the rest of that Sunday doing nothing about it, deliberately. That might sound strange, but it was the most important decision I made in the entire process, because the instinct in a moment like that is to move quickly, to respond while the emotion is still fresh, to match the urgency of what has happened with an equally urgent reaction. That instinct is almost always wrong. Quick responses to public humiliation tend to look exactly like what they are: wounded, reactive, defensive. And defensive is the one thing I could not afford to look. So I closed the app, put my phone in another room, and went about my Sunday the way I would have gone about it otherwise. Made food, went for a walk, read for a while in the evening, let the noise settle, let the initial wave of feeling move through without acting on it. And somewhere in that quietness, clarity started to form. I thought about what Brandon had actually done, not emotionally, analytically. He had filmed someone without their knowledge in a professional environment. He had posted it publicly without consent. He had used a mocking caption designed to humiliate. And he had tagged the location. On the surface, it looked like a joke, a harmless bit of workplace humor that happened to go viral. But underneath, it was something more deliberate than that. It was a choice, made multiple times. The choice to film, the choice to keep it, the choice to post it publicly rather than just show a few friends, the choice to write that caption, the choice to tag the location. Each one of those was a separate decision. Each one could have been the moment he stopped. He didn't stop, which told me something important about how seriously he had considered the consequences. He hadn't. He had thought about the upside, the laughs, the views, the validation from his audience. He had not thought carefully about the downside, about what happened if the person in the video responded in a way he hadn't anticipated, about what happened if the narrative moved somewhere he couldn't control, about what happened when the company name became attached to a viral video about a mocking coworker. He had not thought about any of that, and that was his real mistake. Not the filming, not even the posting. The real mistake was assuming I would behave the way he expected me to. Quietly absorb it, maybe complain to someone privately, maybe feel embarrassed for a few weeks, eventually move on. He had based that assumption on every previous interaction we had, on the fact that I had never reacted loudly to anything he did, on the fact that I was not someone who made scenes. What he had misread was the difference between someone who doesn't react and someone who's choosing not to react. Those are completely different things. I thought about the video I was going to make, not the content of it yet. The tone. The tone was everything. If I matched his energy, sarcastic, combative, point scoring, I would look like someone in a petty workplace dispute. Two co-workers sniping at each other online. That story has no hero. Both sides look small. If I appealed for sympathy, this hurt me, this was wrong, please feel bad for me, I would look like someone asking the internet to validate my feelings. That story has no dignity. It just has a victim asking to be recognized as a victim. Neither of those was what I wanted. What I wanted was something different. Something that made the contrast between what he had done and who I actually was so clear and so obvious that the audience could see it without being told what to think. I didn't want to tell people Brandon was wrong. I wanted to show them who I was and let them draw their own conclusions. I thought about what actually happened that Tuesday afternoon, what I had been working on when he filmed me, what my job actually involved, what my life outside the office looked like, none of which was visible in a 2-second clip with a mocking caption, all of which was worth saying, not to defend myself, just to exist as a full person in the same space where he had reduced me to a punchline. That was the video, not a response to Brandon, not a rebuttal, just me, speaking clearly, without anger, without performance, just directly. I thought about the format, short enough to hold attention, long enough to say something real, filmed simply, no production, no attempt to look slick or carefully edited, because polish would have looked like effort to impress. An effort to impress would have looked like insecurity. What I needed was the opposite of insecurity. I needed to look like someone who was entirely comfortable in their own skin, someone who didn't need the audience to like them, someone who was simply telling the truth because the truth was worth telling. I ran through it in my head several times that evening, not scripting it word for word, just knowing the shape of it, where it would start, what it would cover, where it would end. And by the time I went to sleep that night, I knew exactly what I was going to say. I just needed one more night of stillness before I said it, because the video that was about to change everything needed to come from the calmest possible version of me. I filmed it on Monday morning, before work, early enough that the light coming through the window was clean and natural. I didn't set up anything elaborate, just sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had been sitting when the notification started coming through 2 days earlier. That felt right somehow. I didn't change into anything special, just what I would normally wear. Nothing performed about it, nothing that suggested I had spent hours preparing. Because I hadn't. I'd spent hours thinking. That's different. I propped my phone against a book at roughly eye level, checked the frame once, took a breath, and pressed record. I started by acknowledging the video calmly, not with outrage, not with a detailed breakdown of everything Brandon had done wrong. Just a simple, direct acknowledgement. I said most people had probably seen the clip by now. I said that was me. I said I hadn't known it was being filmed. 3 sentences, no drama attached to them, just facts. Then I moved on, because I didn't want the video to be about Brandon. I wanted it to be about me. I talked about what I had actually been doing that Tuesday afternoon, the report I was working on, what it involved, why it mattered to the company, not in a way that was defensive or trying to prove something, just in the way you talk about work you find genuinely interesting to someone who asked about it, conversationally, specifically, with the kind of detail that only comes from actually knowing what you're talking about. I talked about how long I had been doing this kind of work, what I had learned over 4 years in that role, what the job looked like from the inside versus how it might appear from the outside to someone who had never thought about it carefully. I was not performing humility. I was not performing confidence either. I was just talking, the way I would talk to someone I respected who had asked me a genuine question. Then I said one thing directly, quietly, without raising my voice. I said that being filmed without knowledge and posted publicly for 2 million people to laugh at is not something anyone should experience at work. I didn't say Brandon's name. I didn't call him cruel or petty or unprofessional. I just said the thing that was true. Named the action. described its effect simply, and then moved on again, because lingering on it would have made it the center of the video. And it wasn't the center. I was the center. I ended the video by talking briefly about something outside of work, a project I had been involved in during my own time, something I cared about, something that had nothing to do with the office or Brandon or any of this, just a part of my life that was real and specific and mine. I said it the way you mentioned something to a friend, without fanfare, without trying to impress. And then I said something close to this. I said I wasn't asking anyone to be angry on my behalf. I said I was just introducing myself properly, since apparently the introduction had already been made for me. That was the end of the video. I watched it back once, not to judge it, just to make sure the tone was what I intended. It was calm, direct, human, not a single moment of visible anger, not a single moment that looked like someone performing composure either, just a person sitting at a table talking clearly about who they were. I posted it. No lengthy caption, no hashtags designed to drive traffic, just a single line underneath. Something like, my side of the story for what it's worth. Then I put my phone in my bag, drove to work, sat down at my desk, put my headphones in, and went back to the report I had been working on when any of this started, because that was the correct thing to do. Not because I was indifferent to what happened next, but because the video was out there now. Whatever it was going to do, it was already doing it. My job was not to watch it happen. My job was to keep being exactly the person I had just described on camera. Consistent, steady, unaffected in the ways that mattered. Brandon was in the office that day. I saw him in the kitchen at some point in the morning. He looked at me the way he had always looked at me. No particular awareness. No sense that anything had shifted. He said something casual. I replied normally and walked back to my desk. He had no idea. He was still operating inside the version of events where he had the advantage, where I was the person in the clip, reduced, laughed at, waiting to be embarrassed. He didn't know that by the time that conversation happened in the kitchen, the video I had posted that morning was already moving. By lunchtime on Monday, the video had 50,000 views. I know that because a colleague texted me, someone I trusted, someone outside of Brandon's orbit entirely. She just sent the number with no other comment. I read it, put my phone back in my pocket, and went back to work. By the time I left the office that evening, it was past 300,000. I didn't check it obsessively. I checked it twice, once at lunch, once before I left. Both times I noted the number and moved on, because watching a number climb doesn't change anything about the number. It just consumes the attention you could be spending elsewhere. What I did pay attention to were the comments. Not all of them. There are always people in comment sections who are simply noise, performing opinions for their own audience, saying things they would never say to another person directly. I filtered those out quickly. What I paid attention to was the pattern, and the pattern was immediate and clear. People weren't just sympathetic. They were specific. They were quoting things I had said in the video back to each other. The part where I described my actual work. The part where I named what had happened without dramatizing it. The ending. They were responding to the content, not just the situation. That told me something important. The video had landed the way I intended it to land. Not as a victim's appeal, not as a counterattack, as a person, a full, specific, real person standing clearly in their own story. And then something started happening that I hadn't entirely anticipated. People began going back to Brandon's original video, not to laugh at me, to look at it differently, with the context my video had provided. The comments underneath Brandon's video started shifting. The laughs were still there, but alongside them now were questions. Did he ask permission to film this? Is this person okay with being posted publicly? Does the company know their workplace is being used for content like this? The framing had moved. Brandon's video was no longer just a funny clip. It was evidence of something. And the internet, once it decides to look at something critically, looks at it very thoroughly. People started finding Brandon's account more broadly, looking at his other content, finding the pattern. Other clips filmed without obvious consent, Other moments where someone else's awkwardness or difficulty had been turned into entertainment without their knowledge. It wasn't just me. It had never just been me. And once that became visible, the story stopped being about a viral clip of an awkward moment at work. It became about a person who had built a small following by filming colleagues without their knowledge and posting it publicly for laughs. That is a very different story. And Brandon had no control over the fact that it was being told. I found out later that several people at the company had seen my video before anyone in leadership had. It moved through the office quietly on Monday afternoon, shared on phones, watched at desks, discussed in the kind of low voices that mean something significant is being processed. Some of the people in Brandon's orbit watched it. I know that because the atmosphere in the office on Tuesday was different. Subtle, not dramatic, but different. The particular social confidence Brandon carried into every room felt slightly less certain. The group that usually orbited him were quieter than usual, less ready to laugh at whatever he said. That shift didn't happen because anyone confronted him. It happened because people had watched my video and recalibrated quietly. That's what happens when a narrative moves. It doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just changes the temperature of a room without anyone naming why. By Tuesday evening, my video had passed 2 million views, then kept going. I received messages from people I hadn't expected, former colleagues from previous jobs, people I had met briefly at industry events years earlier, people with no connection to the company at all of them with some version of the same response. They recognized something in what I had said. The specific experience of being reduced publicly by someone who assumed you wouldn't respond effectively. The decision to respond with dignity rather than anger. The particular quiet confidence of someone who knows who they are clearly enough that a mocking video doesn't define them. That recognition spread the video further than any algorithm could have. Because people share things that articulate something they have felt themselves. And somewhere in what I had said on a Monday morning at my kitchen table, a lot of people had found words for something they recognized. Meanwhile, Brandon had gone quiet. His account, which had been active and regular, stopped posting. The original video was still up, but the comments underneath it had turned decisively. The laughs were buried under something else now. Questions, criticism, screenshots being shared of his other content alongside mine. The comparison was not favorable to him. He had built a small platform on a particular kind of humor, and that platform was now being examined in a light he had not prepared for. I didn't watch it happen with satisfaction. That's not quite accurate. It was more that I watched it happen with a kind of quiet recognition. This is what occurs when someone mistakes restraint for weakness. When someone assumes the person they have underestimated will continue to be underestimated. When someone builds their confidence on a version of you that was never the full picture. Brandon had filmed a moment. I had introduced a person, and a person is always more interesting than a moment. He just hadn't understood that yet, but he was about to. HR called me on Wednesday morning, not because I had filed a complaint. I hadn't. Not because a colleague had escalated anything formally. As far as I knew, nobody had. They called because someone in senior leadership had seen my video. Not through the company grapevine, through their own social media feed, on their own time, the way 2 million other people had seen it. The HR manager was professional and measured on the call. She said she wanted to understand the situation from my perspective. She asked if I was comfortable coming in for a conversation. I said yes. We met that afternoon in one of the smaller meeting rooms. Just the two of us. I walked her through everything calmly. The Tuesday afternoon, what I had been doing at my desk, the fact that I had no knowledge of being filmed, the Sunday morning when my phone started going off, the decision I had made about how to respond. She listened without interrupting, took notes, asked a small number of focused questions. I answered each one directly, without embellishment. Without asking for a particular outcome. I simply told her what had happened in the order that it happened. At the end of the conversation, she thanked me, said the company took the matter seriously, said I would hear from her within a few days. I thanked her, walked back to my desk, and continued with my afternoon. I found out later that the conversation with Brandon happened the following day. I wasn't party to it. I didn't ask for details, and none were formally shared with me. What I know is what became visible over the days that followed. Brandon's demeanor in the office changed. The easy confidence he carried everywhere became something more careful, more contained. The group around him thinned noticeably, not all at once, gradually, the way groups thin when the social gravity holding them together weakens. He was still there, still doing his job, but something had shifted in how he occupied the space. The original video disappeared from his account about 10 days after my video posted. I noticed because a colleague mentioned it. I hadn't been checking, but the colleague had, and they wanted me to know. The thing about deleting a video that has already reached 2 million views is that deletion is largely symbolic at that point. Screenshots exist. Shares exist. The internet had already absorbed it. Removing it from his account didn't remove it from the record. It just removed his ownership of it, which, if anything, made the story look worse for him rather than better. Deleting it suggested awareness. Awareness suggested acknowledgement. And acknowledgement was the one thing that couldn't be walked back. The formal consequences Brandon faced through the company, I won't detail specifically. That process was between him and HR, and it wasn't mine to narrate. What I can say is that they were real and they were significant. Formal disciplinary action was taken. His position within the company changed. Some of the professional relationships he had built there became more complicated in ways that were not easily repaired. None of that happened because I had asked for it. None of it happened because I had campaigned for a particular outcome or pushed anyone toward a specific response. It happened because the situation was what it was. Documented publicly. Visible to everyone, including people with the authority to act on it. When you film a colleague without consent and post it publicly with a mocking caption and tag the location clearly enough that anyone looking would know the company, you have involved the company whether you intended to or not. Brandon had not thought about that, and the company's response to finding itself publicly associated with that situation was entirely predictable once the situation was visible. The part one had not anticipated was what came after. About 2 weeks after my video posted, I received a message through the platform from someone I didn't recognize. The name meant nothing to me at first. Then I looked it up and understood who it was. A director at the company. Someone 3 levels above my immediate role. Someone I had never spoken to. Whose name I knew only because it appeared on company-wide communications occasionally. The message was brief. He said he had watched my video. He said he had been impressed not just by the response, but by the way I had described the work itself. He said he hadn't been aware of what my role involved in the detail I described. He asked if I would be open to a conversation. I read that message twice. Then I replied and said yes. We met the following week. It was a genuine conversation. He asked about my work, about how I approach problems, about what I thought the team could be doing differently. I answered honestly and specifically, the same way I had in the video, without performance, without trying to impress, just directly. That conversation led to others. Over the months that follow, my profile within the company changed in ways that had nothing to do with the video directly and everything to do with the visibility it had created. Work I had been doing quietly for 4 years was suddenly being seen by people who had the authority to act on what they saw. Opportunities came, not handed to me, offered, as a result of what those conversations revealed about my actual capabilities. I want to be careful about how I describe that, because it would be easy to frame it as the reward for what I went through. The compensation, the universe balancing its books. But that framing isn't honest. What happened was simpler than that. I had always been doing good work. The video forced certain people to look at me properly for the first time. That's not justice exactly. It's just visibility arriving through an unexpected door. My relationship with Brandon, after all of it, is straightforward to describe. We don't have one. We occupy the same building. We nod if we pass in a corridor. We don't speak beyond necessity. I don't carry anger toward him. I want to be honest about that rather than performing magnanimity. The anger never really took root. What I felt more than anything throughout the whole experience was a kind of steady clarity about who I was, about how I wanted to respond, about what actually mattered when something like that happened. That clarity didn't come from the outcome. It was there from the Sunday morning I sat at my kitchen table and decided not to react with the first emotion that arrived. The outcome just confirmed that the clarity had been worth trusting. The video is still up. I haven't taken it down. Not as a monument to what happened, just because it still says something true. And I see no reason to remove things that are simply true. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do when someone tries to make you small is simply stand up straight and introduce yourself properly. If any part of this resonated with you, the decision to respond with dignity instead of anger, the importance of knowing who you are before someone else tries to define you, leave in the comments. I read every one, and the next story is already waiting.